put out a question to you, and I would dare say everyone has some kind of answer to the question that I'm going to ask. Why do you follow Christ? And I'm assuming, as I look around and all you good church people, that you consider yourself Christ followers. So what is the incentive? If you were in a conversation with someone and they asked you that question, what is the main incentive for you in following Christ? What would you say? I'm kind of rhetorical. I know this is our more formal service, but in the first one, where it's more of a discussion, we actually did throw that around a bit, and there was some great answers that came up. We might have answers that the incentive deals with stuff in this life. I mean, we talk about a transformative life, that this life being transformed, there should be that kind of an impact. We talk about, if we're in this connection, a living relationship with Christ, that in fact there are fruits of the Spirit that come along. You have love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. If those things are in your life, sounds like it would be a pretty good life, doesn't it? And we might go on and say in this, we're promised that not only is there fruits in the quality or nature of this life we live here, but there is fruit as a consequence of our life. Jesus himself said a good tree bears good fruit, a bad tree bad fruit. So who doesn't want to be a good tree? Who doesn't want to have good fruit in their life? So, wow, that's a pretty good reason to follow. We could probably, in a biblical sense, do our own version of, remember that program Heroes, and everybody had a superpower? Well, in effect, that's true of Christianity. We have spiritual capacities, gifts we are given, and we can hone them. Someone is given the gift of hope, of helps, another administration, another teaching, another preaching, another prophecy, another word of knowledge. There's all kinds of some really cool things that we could have and really be blessed even as we are advancing God's kingdom. Some pretty neat stuff goes on. We could look at the mercies that God lavishes in this life. We did it now. We prayed for Brenda, we prayed for Kathy, that God would show his mercy in their healing and everything, give them peace during their operations, and that God, when his Spirit comes on people, they do feel peace. Say, hey, that's not a bad deal. There's a number of things. I was mentioning too in the first group, in churches that attract millennials, for the most part, a lot of them want to go somewhere where people are doing a lot of social activism, feeding the poor, doing this, whatever is a need in the world, and they're doing something about it. If it's something to do with saving the planet, that's wonderful too. All these things. And that's great. What if we're changing the world? That's a pretty neat reason, a pretty good incentive for following Christ if we're empowered to do so. But you know what? God, even in the early church, we looked at these things happening, and even still, God himself says, yeah, this stuff is available to us, but even he had Paul write this to the Corinthian church. He says, love never fails. Of course, love is always part of it. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Where there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. And that's 1 Corinthians 13:8, if you're wondering. All the wonderful stuff is still only temporary. There's a real idealistic side to following Christ. I know if somebody asked me why I first started following God, it wasn't that I needed restoration and some particular healing and something. It was I was looking for the truth. I just wanted to know, what's the truth? What's the big truth of the universe? And that's why I went. That's kind of an idealistic thing. You know what, though? Idealism has its place in Christianity. There is an ideal side to it. However, idealism has this way of just dissolving when you get caught in really hard circumstances. We just looked at, that's why that video, or one reason that video was there. There's Paul in prison. You know, it'd be wonderful for him to have great idealism, which he did. But I wonder how much your idealism keeps you on the path, lets you finish the race, lets you end well when you're in those kind of situations and that kind of hardship. You need something a little more than just your idealism. So we're still looking into this incentive. For great as everything is, it seems somewhat temporary. So what is the great incentive? Well, it's peppered through Scripture. Just like seasoning in good food, it's all through. And you can taste it no matter where you bite. And 1 John, now keep in mind, John is another one of those guys who had some pretty hard living that he went through. What kept him on track? Well, he was writing a letter, and he wrote this. And consider, too, that when we get in 1st, 2nd John, we're talking about somebody who's already lived a whole bunch of that Christian persecution at the time. And they're writing from the conviction at the end of their life. I mean, now, this means something. This isn't just somebody in their first great wave of love and idealism. This is somebody at the end of the race. And 1 John 3:2, John writes, "Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be." This is a man who's been honing his Christianity all his life, way ahead of probably where any of us are in here. And he still says, but we don't know what we shall be. We're not there yet. But we know that when he is revealed, he, of course, being Christ, we shall be like him. Well, aren't we like him now? Yeah, to a point. But there will come a time we will be like him, for we shall see him as he is, the full power of it. The same thing Paul writing in Corinthians again, he says, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead in the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Here's where we're going. There's a temporary thing, and then there is a permanent thing. It seems, though, in our day and culture, we tend to stay with the immediate and the temporary. We kind of back off from the permanent that we don't yet hold. And there's this idea of reward, and we came up with a lot of reasons, actually, as we looked at it, on why we kind of back off a little bit. But keep in mind, we were going through 6 landmarks, and we did okay in the first service. We actually remembered all 6 of them that we're talking about. The premise of this whole series was pretty straightforward. If you want to end up where Jesus Christ is, you have to follow the same path. And we said, well, if you're on the path, then there should be landmarks that you recognize. And we came up with 6 important ones. We started with call. Don't kid yourself, not one of us is in here because we just thought, it'd be really nice to follow God. There was a call that came, and it was really the same with Christ. Even if he knew from birth, if that be the case, it was not until the age of 30 that he responds to the call. Now the ministry starts. So we have the response to the call. Then in the landmarks for Christ, in quick succession, we find a profession publicly, which was the way we're told to profess, baptism. And God confirms him there and affirms him there. Baptism quickly moved to the desert experience. There's a dynamic that we're warning the people, even in baptism. Any of us who have walked with the Lord for any length of time realize, and we're reminded time and time again, we're in a spiritual war. There is a war going on. So when we do something significant for the kingdom, when we do something significantly godly, expect a counterattack, because it comes. It doesn't defeat us, but it comes. So Christ in the desert faced up to what was going on and coalesced his thinking of what was he really doing. Well, the desert is then in his life followed by, we said, his life mission. And we pointed out that for all of us, the basic is the same, whether you're talking Jesus or Mindy or Marilee and maybe Ron, I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in there. But it's always the same thing. It's that God has a will for our life, a plan for our life. Our job is to get in with that will and to do the will of God. We remember the author when we were talking, Debbie had mentioned, and we were trying to think of his name, of Henry Blackaby, made an amazing statement in his book, Experiencing God. He says, find where God is working and join him. Oh, that sounds simple, but the truth is we do everything else. But I'll go do this for God. I think I dreamed this up. I'm going to do this for God and that for God. No, none of that. Is find where God is working in the context of your life and join him. A life mission. Jesus did a life mission. And then we looked at the last words when his mission was finished. Those words, it is finished. And we said there could be a lot of ways finished is used. But in the Greek, it was accomplished. So he had a life mission, and then there was the accomplishment of what he was here to do. And it was a number of things. So it was not just the one thing. There was a number of things we looked at. But he accomplished what he came to do. Well, after the accomplishment, then comes the reward. And we can feel kind of funny in our culture for a couple of reasons. We think it's not humble or it's mercenary. You know, it's kind of like I take Marilee out for dinner and I say, you don't have to pay. You know, I'm going to, you know, because, you know, I don't want to give any hint that I'm looking for a reward or anything. But in fact, as far as Scripture goes, reward is a major part of this whole system. Even Jesus looked to reward. His reward, well, he was raised from the dead. The first fruits, his ascension. He's at on the throne. He's at the right hand of the Father. He's given a whole new level of exaltation. All of this goes along, even though he is God. There was a reward for Christ. His enemies made as his footstool. All of these things. Reward is a major part. We just tend to back away from it. And if I'd say in our culture, there's a couple of things. One is we're an immediate gratification culture. Don't tell me something that's going to come way down the road. What is in it for me right now? What's in it for me now? And there are things, but look at the sermon series to be popular in a lot of places. Think of in the modern church of the things that are out there, the practical, how to have a happy marriage, how to deal with stress, how to deal with this and that. All those things are good, and it's good. Scripture has stuff to say about it. But there's a whole lot of this that's popular, not so much looking to eternity, not so much of when the accomplishment is finished, because that's down the road. Some don't even believe there's anything at the end of it. Happy if there's something that we can gain while we're just here on this earth. So the church does what it tends to do. It backs away. Well, if people don't want to hear so much about reward, we'll kind of back away from it. But keep in mind, everything here passes away. If we were to take the promises of God and look at them, all of these immediate ones that seem so great and we really do desire them, it would be, imagine a large sheet of paper. And if we looked at, in proportion to what God is promising, if we took everything he promises in this life, they'll probably have like this dot here. But then when we look at what is promised, in fact, in light of eternity, it would be this giant, giant circle. This life is so short. Eternity is what really matters. That's where God's spending his time, with promise, and that's where the real power and grandeur is. And yet we tend to stay over there with the little dot. What do we really know? Now, let me qualify just a little bit here, too. There are the blessings of this life, but they're the blessings in this life that will pass away. But God promises something that will never pass away. Something, it's not here now, because even people like Paul and John are saying, it shall be, it's to come, then it will be face to face. It's something yet to come. You know, and we mentioned in our culture, and it might be, wow, that, you know, you're just being pie in the sky. You're just being, as the saying everybody knows, so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. And we get real sensitive about this, so we try and be really practical. But the truth of it is, eternal reward is the major promise that God is giving. So what proportion do we give to it? Well, how much do we understand it? How much do we even look to it? We understand some of this of Christ, but how about us? How is important is reward really to us? In Scripture, it's mentioned over 100 times. The idea of a prize is mentioned over 30 times in that word. So how does it work for us? How does it work for us? As I looked into this, I came across actually a classic teaching. It's more of an encapsulation, but I'll be honest, I hadn't really heard this one before, as classic and as prominent as it is. And it deals with crowns, the idea of crowns. Now, when we talk about crowns, in the first service, there was a good point somebody made when we looked at Revelation and Isaiah and prophecies. There's always a symbol that people can kind of galvanize their thinking around. So what they galvanized their thinking around as far as eternal promises in the early church was a crown. The idea of a crown, and then you begin to understand what the crown is all about. But at least you have this physical thing you can kind of picture. But we learned in another series, and they did pretty good with this one too in the first service. I said, but do you remember in the ancient Greek there were 2 words for crown? There were 2 words. Anyone remember? And they got the diadem thing, and I said, that's like the royal crown, right? And I said, yeah, you're pretty close. In the original Greek, it was diadema, which actually meant to turn around or bind in or bind around. And it means like a turban. See, generally, if it was a king in Persia back in that day, the classic cloth was actually white with blue stripes. They were big on the white and blue. And the binding around the head was also to hold whatever jewels or tiara or crown that went with it. But the idea was that it was bound around. Only a Persian king wore that type of crown. If you weren't a royalty, you didn't wear that. So there is the crown of royalty, the crown of authority. But we also talked about, by the way, there's 2 people that are really mentioned when we talk about the crown of the king. Right? One, there's Christ, but there's someone else. And people they were wondering who could that be? And, well, Satan? And of course, yes, you have the one to whom the crown belongs. And then what's the story of Scripture? You have this antagonist, this evil one who's been trying to steal that crown, trying to steal that authority all along. In Revelation, though, we pick up even a kind of a third thing in with the beast, is that we too try to steal that crown. The fallen humanity tries to make itself God. We do it in all kinds of ways. How many teachings are out there that even now in the postmodern world would say we are our own gods? We are our own gods. We can do whatever with the universe. It's all about what we think, feel. We put ourselves on the throne all the time, especially as a human race. I came across the interesting teaching. Actually, they had a video on YouTube of holographic thinking. Have you ever heard of that? Holographic thinking. And it starts out, I was telling you in the first service, this video started out kind of like the Matrix. Hopefully I don't feedback, but remember Morpheus in the Matrix? And the video starts off like, I don't know if you're ready to hear this. I don't know if you're ready to understand, but this is the truth. And it goes on from here, and it's basically we are our own gods. The universe is the creation of our own minds, and it goes on at great length about this. The idea that we're our own gods is really big. The thing that Revelation teaches us is that whenever we get to the point we convince ourselves we're our own God, we become monsters. We become the beast. we become something really ugly. Kind of ironic, isn't it? We try and steal God's crown and we become monsters. We don't ever see in Scripture us getting the diadema. We never get the king's crown. For us, there is another crown, the Stephanos. And that maybe doesn't look quite as impressive, nor should it. But you've probably seen this in all kinds of places. Generally now, we'll see it at the Olympics, a garland wreath that is worn by the victors. It's always been about that. You take on some challenge and you're the one who wins the prize. You're the one who made it through, and you get the Stephanos, you get the wreath of victory. And that's the one that we are told is ours if we continue to pursue. Now that wreath, that crown is something that we're after. That's the one that doesn't belong to us yet, but we can earn it. That is the big payoff. Now, in this teaching on crowns, so far back, I think, in classic church history that I still, right now, confess, haven't found the origin of where it started. But it's more of an insight and encapsulation. And it's called the 5 heavenly crowns, or the 5 crowns of reward, or the 5 heavenly crowns of reward, something to that respect. And it's a summary of when our Stephanos, remember, we never get the king's crown. The Stephanos is given to us. And it's a crown, this wreath of victory is mentioned in 5 different ways. There's the crown imperishable. There is the crown of rejoicing. There is the crown of righteousness. There's the crown of glory. And there is the crown of life. And usually seems most of the teachings have them in that order, is the way it must have first originated in this teaching. Now, in these 5 crowns, it's all about this eternal reward we're talking about. Now, here's my thinking on this, is that I know we went through 6 landmarks, and this gets confusing. Now, here we are. We're on the final landmark. We're talking about reward. And reward, I want us to go back to the early church and use this teaching of the 5 crowns to savor reward, because, I really think that we spend very proportionately not enough time, not too much, not enough time appreciating and understanding what eternal reward is promised to you and promised to me. So we're going to live in that a little bit. So we're going to take a couple of weeks to go through these 5 crowns. Now, this morning, my objective was just to get us thinking in the way of eternal reward. Not all the wonderful things in this, like eternal reward, because all this stuff, as great as it is passing away. This stuff isn't. This is the main deal. And so we're wrapping our heads around that, but then looking at, through a few weeks anyway, just taking each of these things and looking at it. Now, I just said 5 crowns, but this is where balance will come into in this, is I found some other articles that read more like how you can get all 5 crowns, and all I could think of was Pokemon, got to catch them all. Is that what it's, get these crowns lined up. I think technically, as we look at it, it's probably more like 1 crown, and we're looking at it from 5 angles. 1 crown with 5 levels of meaning. 1 crown and 5 great natures in this reward. So we're going to look at it more in that term of from angles and levels. But there is a crown to be had. Not the literal thing. That's just something to wrap your mind around to get you started. But there is reward beyond what we can fully appreciate in this life. But it is there. It is there. We don't understand it. I'm going to sidetrack a little bit with, and squeal on Kitsy a little bit. We were out doing our prayer walk the other day. Kitsy's head all of a sudden came up. Her eyes got big. Oh, no, I'm in trouble. But Kitsy mentioned how with an atheist friend that they said they didn't even want to go to heaven. And that's reasonable. I think there's some Christians that are pretty lukewarm on it too. And for a very basic reason, if you have no appreciation for what this place or what this end, this destination is, why would you want to go there? No wonder there's a song, and you'll have to admit, you know what? In heaven, there ain't no beer. That's why we drink it here, And there's all kinds. Well, I don't want to go to heaven. None of my friends will be there. It'll just be a big church service. And who'd want to go there? And there's been that respect. Well, yeah, if we have no appreciation for the crown, if we have no appreciation for this place, which is this giant circle of promise we were talking about, why would anyone want to go there? And so they say all kinds of silly things. But what do you know? What do I know? How much do we appreciate? How much do we actually know about this? That's the quest over the next few Sundays, is just what is the reward that we're going after. This was a big deal from the early church. You saw the video with Paul. What an end to a life. What kept him on course to the end? Why did he run the good race? Why was he still good with it? He wrote to the Corinthian church in the latter years. He says, do you not know that all the runners in a stadium compete, but only one receives the prize? So run to win. There is a biblical statement for you, run to win. And then we could define what winning is. Each competitor must exercise self-control in everything. They do it to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable one. So I do not run uncertainly or box like one who hits only the air. Instead, I subdue my body and make it my slave, so that after reaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified. There is a crown to be had. Consider it a little bit of homework for the week, but just reflection on a couple of questions to think about. What proportion of your hope, when you think of the hope of your Christian faith, what proportion of that is actually that giant circle, that eternity, the reward in eternity? How much of your Christian faith is more obsessed with just the immediate, just with what's before you? How much do you actually know about what God has actually said about this reward? And is it real enough to you to actually invest in it yourself? I'm going to ask someone to do this. Would somebody be so brave as to turn over a next step card and read the little challenge thing? Just read it out loud.
What eternal rewards do I understand God has promised me?
Okay. What eternal rewards do I understand that God has promised me? See, everybody has an answer for this. You're in here, there's something that is your incentive. And usually I say, it's between you and God and all of that. Or if you don't have something, that's fine. But you know what? There is a problem if not everybody in this room could not write something down there. There's got to be something that is your incentive. So I'm going to encourage two things. One is to be thinking about this question all through the week. But even right now is to write down, if somebody, what's your main incentive? What do you understand to be the eternal reward? What do you understand that to be right now?